Hello out there in the virtual world. My name is Jordan Person. I am our staff nurse and one of our senior staff writers for Grassroots America magazine. If you've been tuning in lately, then you know we've brought our magazine to life. We've been interviewing scientists and medical professionals and industry professionals that make our magazine what it is. Today, I have with me the amazing Jahan Marcu. He is the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine, as well as one of the founding partners of Marcu and Arora. Thank you so much for being here today, Jahan.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
So let's start out a little bit by you telling us who you are and how you became this master of endocannabinoid medicine.
Well, it started a long time ago, I think shortly before the first CME on cannabis was ever created, at the turn of the century. And I started off, as most people do, very interested about this place and about this space, and spending a lot of time in libraries. And being an expert in the endocannabinoid system really wasn't even something I could comprehend at the time, because that wasn't really a term people were throwing around. And so in the early 2000s, I just realized how interesting the space was, and it all started with a conversation. And I was talking with someone, and they were talking about the medical benefits of cannabis. I think I was 18 or 19 at the time. My drug education consisted of that time. The DARE came to high school and showed us a slideshow. And this person said, there's all these things that cannabis can treat. There's all these other compounds in there. And I was like, oh, all you know about THC is it increases your heart rate for a while and makes you eat a lot. And they said, no, there's a lot more there, but they couldn't give me any specifics. And so I went to Pubmed the next day, and I just put in the term cannabis. And there were so many articles, I didn't even know where to begin. It opened up this whole world for me, a new system that wasn't in any textbooks in my biology classes. I talked to professors, they didn't even know it existed. And so I started looking for opportunities in labs. And I got my first lab position in about 2004 with Dr. Sean McAllister, working on aggressive gliomas and THC and CBD combinations to inhibit their growth. And while I was doing that, though, I was also very active with cannabis patients and working with different organizations. And I also even got some real world experience working at Berkeley Patients Groups, one of the oldest dispensaries in the country. And also doing things like, we need to test these products, and opening up testing labs, and working with, labs today that have national chains. But again, this is over 15 years ago. And so eventually I was just really enjoying what I was doing without really a thought about where it was going. And this is how a lot of science happens. Darwin wasn't like, I'm going to create this big theory. He was like, dropped out of surgeon school and got on a boat to the Galapagos and started, tracking birds. And suddenly he's like, I got a theory now. So I was just gathering data and having a great time doing it, and meeting all my heroes in the cannabis space, because it was a very small field. And I went to my first Cannabinoid Society meeting in 2006. And then shortly after that, Dr. Mary Abood invited me to join her lab at Temple University and work on a PhD, and just hit the ground running and explore whatever I wanted to within the bounds of her lab. And I got to collaborate with people like Raphael Meshulam and Nefi Stella, and just the list goes on of really cool nerds in the space. And my project involved working on the structure and function of the CB1 receptor, as well as the role of the endocannabinoid system in bone health. And basically, we helped to characterize the structure of the receptor, along with, it was an international effort. And now today, because of the data, standing on the shoulder of giants, as they say, we have a crystal structure of the CB1 receptor. And I got to contribute just a little bit to that discovery, which is like, that's like a dream come true for a lot of researchers, to see something like that come to fruition. And so, again, when I was in school, there were no cannabis programs, there were no cannabis trainings. I had to check out library books and promptly return them when I was finished because there was nothing there. And you know, it was very interesting to me to just kind of be in this vacuum. And attitudes change. And I remember talking with cannabis colleagues at the time and saying, oh, can't use cannabis because I'm on a DEA Schedule 1 license and I won't be able to do the research anymore. And some people are saying you should fight it and like fight the man. And I'm like, why would I do that? I'm in like this, I'm getting to like live my dream of fighting brain cancer with cannabinoids. And you want me to start a political battle that will interrupt my research? Maybe tomorrow. Let me see what happens with the data. But I found that one of the things that really opened my eyes to the barriers to research was the overregulation. I had to track where every picogram of THC went in the lab. However, it was in San Francisco, so I could probably walk right out the front door of the lab and buy more THC than the laboratory had ever had in its history. So it was really a weird thing. And dealing at a young age in your young 20s with DEA inspections, radiation safety inspections. And if there's one thing that's regulated more than THC is radioactive THC. Like that is literally the most regulated thing. And so it was a lot of responsibility, but it was very exciting. So I got to walk this fine line between the industry in its early days, sort of as a paleontologist among dinosaurs. And because when I tell people today what the industry is like, it's 2020, and I tell people what it was like in 2006, they don't believe me. They're like, no, there weren't these huge lumbering beasts just doing whatever they wanted. And I was like, things like employee safety training, you'd be lucky if you had it. Luckily, like Berkeley Patients Group trained us on everything from raid prevention to how to talk to patients.
Wow.
It was a very, very good place to kind of get a base with real world data, while doing world-class research with some of the most amazing people out there.
That's absolutely incredible. You mentioned a couple things that I want to circle back to. Number one is Pubmed. That is something that I recommend to people on a daily basis. As we were talking before we started this video, when people say there's just not enough science out there, that's where I send them, is to Pubmed. Can you explain a little bit more what Pubmed is for our viewers?
So PubMed.gov is basically it's like a search engine for research studies. Now you won't find every article you want to find in there. You'll find a lot of high quality research and journals that have submitted and been approved to be listed there. But that's not the end of the story. And I encourage PubMed, super easy. There's also, of course, just using the internet and looking up, research articles that way. There's also your local medical school libraries. There are some articles that I have that I've had to actually go into the archives of the local medical schools to get copies of them because they're not listed on PubMed. So PubMed's just the tip of the iceberg to find those studies. What I've been obsessing with these last couple of years is clinicaltrials.gov. This is like the Instagram for scientists. They post clinical studies when they're announced, when they're ongoing, when they're finished, when they're canceled, preliminary data. If you want to see something really amazing, put in cannabidiol into clinicaltrials.gov. Your mind will be blown of how much stuff is in process right now. And maybe even throw in psychedelics and cannabis. You'd be even more surprised what is being approved and going on. Now, some of these studies, just like a post on social media, sometimes it gets real popular and then sometimes it doesn't. And so there is a bit of, I feel like, an open science public responsibility that if you see something cool, to share it and help those scientists recruit people. Because, most people running a clinical study don't have a PR marketing budget. They're just put it out there and hope people sign up and enroll in it through the proper channels. So if you want to be the armchair advocate, go to clinicaltrials.gov and let everyone know that there are studies that are looking for patients to enroll in. And it's really surprising everything they're looking at.
That is amazing advice. And I'll put that link below just so that you guys have that in there as well. That's amazing information. The science dork that I am cannot wait till we're done with this video so that I could go check it out. Oh, Back on topic, there was something else that you mentioned that sparked my interest. In regards to using THC in the lab test that you were doing, were you limited to not being able to test on humans? Were you only allowed to use rat? Like what were your parameters for your research?
Well, I was just happy to be able to put THC into anything and see what happened, along with CBD, CBN, and in many other synthetic cannabinoids, CBG at the time. I mean, it was a very nerdy Wonka factory, if you will. But the closest I ever got to humans, which was close enough for me at the time, was working with a neurosurgeon who would do 2 brain cancer surgeries a week. And I would go to the hospital sometimes to pick up the cells from surgery on dry ice. And then we'd culture them, grow them, maybe turn it into a cell line, which is just a stabilized kind of predictable growth pattern for them, and treat them. But we did use some of the commercially available cell lines as well, that to compare them. But a lot what we published was from humans, and you notice that they have little code names. SF126, that's the San Francisco patient number 126. You see U251, that's a human from, they have all these code names, just like, you see code names for compounds, like Meshulam's compounds all have HU in front of them, Hebrew University, right? So very similar thing. But it was really, I got to say, it was really cool. You have this NSF, NIH funded surgeon, and you're meeting with him on a weekly basis as some nobody 20-year-old talking about your cannabinoid experiments on these cells. It was really, it's an unbelievable time. And that was before grad school.
Right. That's incredibly thrilling. I mean, that had to have just set you on fire to know that you wanted to be involved in this in the future. When you were in school, what did you actually write your PhD on? What was your
So,
PhD on?
so my PhD was officially on the structure and function of the CB1 receptor, the cannabinoid type 1 receptor, and the role of the endocannabinoid system in bone. And when I first started, my PhD, part of my bread and butter was I had this experimental system going, which involved live cells and doing radioactive tracing, radioactive binding. Um, radioactive tracing isn't the proper term, but I feel like for people who aren't scientists, it makes more sense because you're trying to look at what's happening in these receptors. So I got to look at things like the allosteric activity of CBD. I think it was probably one of the first groups in the country to actually start to characterize what is CBD doing at the cannabinoid 1 receptor. It's not stimulating it, and I wish people would stop saying that. It's like one of my biggest pet peeves. You can't just like take a poster about THC and erase it and write CBD does this. That's a really bad idea. CBD has some really amazing things that it does, and I got to explore that. Also, because I was able to tell what can stimulate and what can't stimulate a CB1 receptor, I talked to Mahmoud El-Soli at the University of Mississippi, who's the federal cannabis guy, at a conference. I just said, hey, I've read like every one of your papers. You're amazing. Let's talk about doing a project together. 3 months later, I get a box in the mail at the lab, and it's just all these compounds that he had purified and isolated from the plant that they didn't even have names yet. And I went through so many laboratory materials. There were so many, it was like Christmas in July. There were so many compounds, I could not even get through them all. It was really amazing. And there's a little bit of confusion about that guy because I don't think they really understand what his job is, but as a researcher, I found him to be the most open, friendly, and encouraging collaborator that I've probably ever had. Now, we didn't actually do a publication on the data, but it was still really kind of, as you said, thrilling to be in this space. And so, I was doing these characterizing compounds for colleagues. I was characterizing their activity. I was also working in the synthetic cannabinoids because in 2009-ish, there was a huge synthetic cannabinoid, what I would call epidemic issue, a new arms race with drugs that the law enforcement was facing. And so I incorporated synthetic cannabinoids into the thesis as well to look at how they bind. And that turned out to be a really good idea because we talk about keys and locks and receptors.
Mhm.
And, THC and anandamide and the endocannabinoids, it's predictable. But something weird was happening with some of these synthetic cannabinoids. And I was able, in the lab experimentally, what we do, so a researcher, how they do experiments is like if I was studying how a car worked, I'd slowly take away a piece of the car one at a time until it no longer worked, and then start putting pieces back to see what is actually essential for the car to go. So, okay, get rid of the doors. You don't need seat belts. You don't even need seats. You may not even need a steering wheel, right? It's a car is a very simple thing. So same thing with cannabinoid receptors. I started mutating different amino acids in the protein. And I found that from previous research, I was able to find an amino acid that looked very interesting, and we changed it to make it, because the amino acids have positive and negative charges, and they hold the proteins together like a nice little ball or in a specific shape. And once you break those little positive negative charges, keeping them together, the shape changes. And we were able to prevent THC and the regular cannabinoids that we know and love from stimulating the receptor, but synthetic cannabinoids with indole rings like the JWH and the WIN series, WIN, could still stimulate the receptor. And so not only were these synthetic cannabinoids way more potent at the receptor, they're actually hitting another part of the receptor to stimulate it, and not necessarily what you would see in nature, as it were. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it definitely did not make me feel more comfortable about some of these new synthetic cannabinoids with indole rings and other stuff we don't really see too much of in nature, at least not yet.
Wow. Sorry, I had it muted. My dog was barking in the background. That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I can only imagine how you felt as a 20, 21-year-old being exposed to this type of information. So eventually that led you to the American Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine, for which you are the editor-in-chief. Can you please explain to our viewers what exactly is the American Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine, and what is it that you guys are documenting?
So, um, before I get into that, I want to stress, if anyone's listening to this and wondering, what are the most important skills, like, oh, yeah, that guy sounds like he's having a lot of fun. What are the two most important things to get there? One is passion and enthusiasm. I got my lab positions when I was in my 20s because I was so GD enthusiastic about coming to the lab and working, which is it's a dying quality. People who want to show up to work, you just don't find it too much. So they were thrilled to have me, even though I was the least technically qualified, because you will learn. And so it was just easy to work with me. The second one is never stop working on your ability to communicate, writing, speaking, and editing. Having passion and enthusiasm is important, but also having the skills to communicate those results and what you're learning about. Those two are so important. And, the publisher of the American Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine, my colleague, Kenny, he has published lots of other journals. And I believe he's done things like brought the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, to the United States, published that as well, the New England Journal of Medicine as well. The publishing company does a lot of stuff, and they created a separate group just to look at the cannabis space. And they interviewed and talked to a lot of people. But I got the role of editor-in-chief because I communicate well. I'm very passionate about the science. And I'm not afraid to correct myself if I learn new things, because science is not a religion, right? It goes through a peer review process, and it gets updated, it changes. For example, when I presented my first research poster when I was, I don't know if I could even, maybe it have been 20, 22, something like that. It was on CBD and brain cancer. And the title was Non-Psychotropic Cannabinoids Can Inhibit Brain Cancer. Now, why do we say, or non-psychoactive cannabinoids inhibit brain cancer? Why do we say that? Because we didn't have any evidence at the time that CBD directly stimulated receptors in the brain, but now we know it interacts with serotonergic receptors. We know it interacts with different ion channels and vanilloid receptors in the brain. We know now that it is psychoactive. Does it cause intoxication? No, it's like being sober, but different. So information changes, and I had also done things in the past like that are very unpopular. Like 5-6 years ago, I got on my hemp box and started talking about the vape crisis. I'd go to conferences and say, some of these vapes you really shouldn't trust. Look what happens when you don't even have oil in them. Stuff still comes out of them. I was really concerned, even though I was a fan of the delivery system and think that vaporization, whether it's of oil or flower, is probably the most efficient way. And if you go to a clinical setting like Temple University's the lung center, a lot of things in the clinic are delivered by inhalation. So it's not some crazy idea to deliver medicine by inhalation, but you want to be careful. And so the journal publisher saw all these things that I, look like a prophet because I was the only person talking about a vape crisis 5 years before it happened. They saw an extensive work across different societies and the publications. And so the American Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine, though, needed someone who could walk on both sides, who could, you can edit that out, right?
Maybe.
Okay, well, that's a break for the listener as the siren goes by. So what the journal needed was someone who could walk both sides, bring in that real world data, and wasn't afraid, because what was lacking in the space was a place for people who are studying products that people are actually using in research journals. Research journals, most of the time, will just hands down reject anything looking at a CBD product on the market, anything looking at a THC containing, unless it comes from the University of Mississippi, approved by the DEA, or is an FDA approved medicine already, they will not touch the cannabis research study. In fact, I even found a study on, it was published like 2 years ago, on cannabis varieties and their effects on like human physiology and subjective effects. But they could only publish the chemical data literally because California law did not allow them to publish data about the effects of these products that people were consuming. To me, that it was ridiculous. We have the tools, the ability, the expertise. There are textbooks and guidelines on how to do a peer review process so that something could be reproducible, so that's as good as it can be. And so we applied this modern phenomenon created by human beings called the peer review process. And I just invited all these people I've known for years to say, let's make this happen. And we started approaching the industry, and we got some studies about CBD published in there. We've got clinicians writing about research where they take existing published research that's really popular and talk about how it applies or doesn't apply to their clinical practice. And the American Journal of Endocannabinoid, or AJEM, is really targeted for doctors. Now, we have content in there that anyone can appreciate and read, but it really is written for doctors. And another thing, as being unpopular in my time and popular later, one of the decisions that we made for our first issues, I said, no article is going to be longer than 5 pages. I don't care who you are. You can be the queen of cannabis. You're not publishing more than 5 pages in my journal, because we don't need every article to start with 3-page introductions to the endocannabinoid system. No, so I started to prevent people from publishing what I called useless information or unnecessary information, unnecessary text. Just put it in there in the most succinct form, because anything worth saying will be said succinctly. And the authors loved it because, one, it's less work for them. They don't have to constantly reintroduce the same thing. And of course, in every article, we do have some background information on the endocannabinoid system and sort of the 101, but we wanted to unfetter our authors from having to address everything about everything before just sharing one little figure about their findings. And the audience has responded very well to that. People can read a short article. And so if you already have, you've spent, I don't know, 100 hours already probably reading about cannabis. Anyone listening to this, I'm guessing you've been exposed to the endocannabinoid system. You've been exposed to what cannabis is and what's in it. You can follow along in this journal. And that has allowed us to really do some interesting things with content and focus on data versus, making sure every article is 30 pages long. And I mean, I love a good 30 to 80 page scientific article, but most people don't. Most people want, less than 5 pages, get the information, get high quality information. And, we're going to have 3 issues out total this year. And then next year we're looking at 6 issues. And again, it's a blend of basic. We really don't publish that much basic research. We're looking at a little bit of it, but we really want to focus on human studies. And I'm talking to researchers in Europe and the US, both private and academic, who are doing things like women's health studies with CBD, who are looking at opioid use disorder and different products, all clinical, all real world data.
That's amazing. If there are any scientists or doctors listening right now, or even nurses and physical therapists, if there are people out there that have been performing case studies and not realizing that that's what they've been doing simply by working with the patient and working with the plant for the last several years, is that something that if they feel they have a piece, could they reach out to you and the journal and see if there's some type of symmetry there, or is
Absolutely. And this is one of the issues we faced right away is everyone you wanted to bring to the table, their plate was already full. So it was hard to, it was difficult. We talked to a lot of clinicians. They're like, I have 1,000 patients and a lot of them use cannabis. And we're like, great, write up a report. They're like, I don't have the time. And plus I'm an MD. I'm not a technical writer. Very few MDs, write a lot of technical papers. They don't need to. They that's not their job. Could try to give them other people's jobs. So one of the things we just do is connect them with our technical editing staff. So I've taken on some projects with certain clinicians, which our technical staff may not be equipped to do. But yeah, we assign technical writers to MDs sometimes to help them get it ready for a positive experience in the peer review process. We've definitely had to turn down some articles because they just couldn't get into shape. But if you stick through the process, the back and forth with the peer reviewers and work with your technical editor, usually there is a light at the end of the tunnel that you can get to. And I think for many clinicians, some of them, I mean, it was so rewarding. Dr. Christian Shaw, who's an MD PhD in Arizona, we've worked on our second case report, and it was he's been in this healthcare space for a long time. This was his first scientific publication. He was super excited about it, shared it with his colleagues, presented it at his society meetings. So this can be a tremendous opportunity, and you're probably collecting data and don't know it. And you don't have to hire a staff writer. You can just reach out to us and we can figure out a plan to get you on track. And it might be as simple as just submitting us some raw data, and then you have a conversation with one of our technical writers about how to proceed.
excellent. And for those of you listening, if you are interested, we will have all of Jahan's contact information as well listed below the video and on our social media platforms. So if you do want to get in touch with him and become a part of the active research and the advancement of this plant, please do reach out to him. I know I personally will be, for all the data I've been collecting over the years. So Jahan, let's go ahead and end today's conversation with your newest venture, which has you as a founding partner of Marcu and Arora. Can you please tell us what exactly that is and what you will be doing?
So so my colleague, Dr. Aurora, and I have been following each other's careers and meeting up over the years. And we really got to know each other through the American Chemical Society's Cannabis Chemistry Subdivision. And we always kind of had an interest in working together. We worked on a publication together. We did a journal club for the American Chemical Society together. And we were like, well, why don't we start working together and with our mutual passions? And we basically shared a meal and started chatting about cannabis, and psychedelics, and working in those industries. And our passion was mutually infectious. And so what followed was just a new consulting firm to work in both the cannabis space and the psychedelic space. And, we're providing a lot of services. It's sort of a boutique consulting firm, but we're training people how to talk about data. We're talking to companies saying maybe you shouldn't spend so much in marketing and actually generate data and let that drive your marketing. Let the data be your marketing. Like, instead of saying cannabis cures something and showing a mice study, why don't you actually look at your product and see what people are saying about it? That'd be way more powerful than saying we think of our consumers as rats. That's why we use rat data to justify our marketing data. Not so great, honestly. But I can be a little cheeky as it gets late in the afternoon. And a natural extension of that was we started a podcast called How to Launch an Industry. And we bring in PhDs and we really talk about nothing that anyone else is talking about. I don't mean to say we don't talk about nothing, but we talk about a lot of data, and we break it down. And we really try to bring in PhDs and other experts to talk about research in the space. And we've talked about things like the science of bad trips with psychedelics and why those are therapeutically important. We were going to be recording an episode upcoming about transdermal CBG, CBN, and CBD, and comparing those in data studies. And we also break down news and try to debunk stuff. And we always play a game at the end of the show. The most popular game right now is Guess the Psychedelic, which is a 20 questions game. We bring in a researcher and we have to ask questions, like, is it naturally occurring? Would my mom have used it at Woodstock? These sorts of things to try and figure out what it is. And this is just how I like to learn. So I've started to share that with the world. And part of the reason I think of starting Marcu and Arora was, the opportunities and experiences that I came across were very rare at the time. And I'm very grateful for them. And I want to share that with people. And so this podcast has really been a way for us to share how we learn, how we find information, but most importantly, how we think about the information we're presented with in these industries, whether it's a news article, a pop science article, or a hardcore academic article. But I encourage you all to check it out. Let us know what you think. Yeah.
I know that I will certainly be subscribing to How to Launch an Industry. The science dork in me and just the person who appreciates knowledge is very excited to go listen to some past episodes. As everyone out there listening knows, we don't just talk about the powerful plant medicine cannabis, we also talk about the psychedelic realm as well. So for those of you out there listening, make sure you turn into that podcast as well. Thank you all for your time today. Jahan, thank you so much for spending some time with us today and telling us about who you are and the future of what you're doing. We appreciate you so much. Keep up the amazing work and just thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely.